Growing old at home brings comfort, familiar walls, cherished memories, and a sense of independence we've held for decades. But sometimes the stairs feel steeper, the silence feels heavier, and deep down we wonder, am I still safe here? Is it time to ask for more help? The idea of moving to a nursing home can feel overwhelming. No one wants to feel like they're giving up. But what if it's not giving up? It's choosing safety, support, and peace of mind. In this video, we'll explore 7 gentle but important signs that it might be time to consider assisted living and how to make that decision with care, clarity, and dignity. Let's begin. Part 1. 7 signs it might be time to consider a nursing home. Making the decision to move into a nursing home or assisted living facility is never easy, but sometimes the body and mind begin to whisper what the heart has been avoiding. Here are 7 signs that it may be time to consider getting more support, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. Sign number 1, frequent falls or feeling unsafe at home. It often starts with something small, a slip in the bathroom, a moment of dizziness getting out of bed, grabbing the furniture as you walk, just in case you didn't fall. Not this time, but the fear, it lingers. One of the clearest signs that it might be time to consider assisted living is when you begin to feel unsafe in your own home. Why this matters more than we realize. Our homes are filled with comfort and memory, but not always with safety. Stairs, rugs, low lighting, slippery showers. What once felt familiar now presents quiet danger. For many older adults, falls are not just accidents, they are turning points. A single fall can lead to a fracture, hospitalization, or even long-term disability. But often, the real danger is not just physical, it's emotional. After a fall, or even a close call, we begin to withdraw. You may avoid going up or down stairs, stop cooking meals out of fear of dropping something hot, limit your movement to play it safe. Begin to rely more on others, or worse, try to hide your struggles. This quiet loss of confidence is one of the earliest signs that living alone may no longer be working as well as it once did. Assisted living communities are designed to reduce risk and support independence in safe, thoughtful ways. They offer flat flooring and wide open spaces, grab bars in bathrooms and fall-resistant designs, emergency response systems in every room. Staff nearby 24/7 in case of a fall, stumble, or sudden illness. Daily support for things like bathing, dressing, and walking without taking away your autonomy. It's not about taking control away. It's about creating an environment where you don't have to live in fear. If you found yourself thinking, what if I fall and no one hears me? I'm fine, but what if next time I'm not so lucky? I used to enjoy walking around the house, now I avoid moving too much. Then maybe it's time to consider this question. Is my home still helping me live, or is it quietly limiting me? Choosing assisted living isn't giving up. It's choosing safety, strength, and peace of mind. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is accept a little help. Sign number 2, struggling with daily self-care. There's a quiet shift that happens as we age. What once took just a few minutes, showering, dressing, brushing teeth, preparing a light breakfast, suddenly feels longer, heavier, more confusing, more tiring, and sometimes even frightening. One of the clearest signs that it might be time to consider assisted living is when you begin to struggle with daily self-care. Self-care isn't just about hygiene. It's about maintaining dignity, not routine, and a sense of normalcy. But over time, simple tasks can become difficult. Showering feels dangerous due to slippery floors. Buttoning clothes becomes a challenge with stiff hands. You forget whether you took your medication. Preparing meals becomes overwhelming or skipped altogether. Laundry, cleaning, and even brushing your hair fall by the wayside. You may feel frustrated, embarrassed, or worst of all, ashamed to ask for help. But here's the truth. Needing help is not failure. It's a human experience, and it's far more common than we think. When self-care begins to slip, it often goes unnoticed by others, and sometimes even by ourselves. But the consequences can be serious. Missed medications can lead to confusion or health complications. Poor hygiene increases the risk of infection or skin issues. Skipping meals can lead to malnutrition or weakness. Living in a cluttered or unclean space increases fall risk. Most dangerously, it can lead to isolation. You may begin avoiding visitors or social interactions, not because you don't want company, but because you're afraid someone might see how hard it's become. Assisted living isn't about doing everything for you. It's about offering just enough help so you can feel like yourself again, whether it's a gentle hand during your morning routine, someone to help you remember your medications, nutritious meals prepared and shared in community, or simply knowing someone is there if you need them. These small supports add up to freedom, confidence, and peace of mind. If getting ready for the day leaves you exhausted, if your hygiene routine feels more stressful than supportive, if meals are skipped more often than served, then maybe it's time to ask, what would life feel like with just a little more help? Sometimes choosing care isn't giving up control, it's taking it back. Sign number three, memory loss or confusion. When familiar things start to feel unfamiliar, we all forget things now and then, where we put the keys, what day of the week it is, or the name of an old song. That's part of being human and part of growing older. But sometimes forgetfulness turns into something more. You start forgetting whether you've eaten or if you took your medication. You find yourself getting lost in your own neighborhood or confused by a simple task you've done 100 times before. And perhaps hardest of all, you sense it happening and it frightens you. This quiet confusion, this growing fog, is one of the clearest signs that it may be time to consider assisted living or a memory supportive environment. Mild memory lapses are normal, but if they start to interfere with daily life, it's time to pay attention. Some signs include forgetting names of close family members, repeating the same questions multiple times, wandering or getting lost in familiar places, feeling overwhelmed when following steps or instructions, confusing morning and evening, or mixing up dates. These moments may come and go, but they take a toll, not just on you, but on your family and loved ones. They may start to worry constantly, check in more often, or quietly wonder, is mom safe on her own? Memory loss doesn't just affect thinking, it affects judgment, safety, and emotional well being. You may forget to turn off the stove or mistake a stranger for someone you know. You may feel frustrated, ashamed, or withdrawn, even before others notice what's changing. In this stage, having structured support is not a burden, it's a form of protection. It allows you to live with dignity, even when clarity comes and goes. Many assisted living communities now offer specialized memory care units. These spaces are designed with calm, secure environments, gentle routines that reduce confusion, staff trained in compassionate redirection and memory support, familiar cues to help residents feel grounded and safe, even in earlier stages. Just having a little support with reminders, routines, and guidance can reduce stress and help you feel more at ease in your own mind. If you've caught yourself forgetting things more often, if your confidence has been shaken by moments of confusion, or if loved ones have quietly started checking in more often, it may be time to ask with compassion, would a little structure help me feel less lost and more at peace? Sometimes the most courageous step is simply accepting support before the confusion deepens. Sign number four, emotional isolation or loneliness. When the silence becomes too loud, there's a kind of silence that feels peaceful. And then there's the kind that feels heavy when the phone doesn't ring, when days blur together, when you sit at the table and realize you haven't had a real conversation in days. This quiet loneliness, this emotional isolation, is one of the most overlooked but powerful signs that it might be time to consider assisted living. Loneliness is not just a feeling, it's a health risk. Studies have shown that chronic loneliness can be as harmful to your health as smoking or obesity. It increases the risk of depression and anxiety, memory loss and confusion, weakened immune function, heart disease, early death. And yet, so many older adults suffer in silence, not because no one cares, but because they don't want to be a burden. So they say, I'm fine. I like being alone. Everyone's busy these days. But inside, they're aching for connection, for someone to talk to laugh with, to simply be with. You may still be living in the same house you've known for decades, but it no longer feels like home. It feels too quiet. Meals are eaten in silence. Birthdays go uncelebrated. Evenings stretch on, and the television becomes your only company. This isn't living, it's enduring. Assisted living communities offer more than safety and support. They offer companionship, shared meals with others, gentle daily activities and group events, conversations over coffee, the chance to be known, seen, and heard. Again, you don't have to be alone to stay independent. You can still have your own space, your own room, your own rhythm, but now with the comfort of people nearby. If the silence in your home has started to feel heavy, if you wake up wondering what the day holds and feel little joy in answering, if the sound of your own voice is the one you hear most often, then maybe what you're missing isn't just help, it's human connection. And that too is a form of care. Sign number 5, caregiver burnout. When the ones caring for you begin to break down. Sometimes it's not your body that sends the signal. It's the body and spirit of the one caring for you. Your spouse, your adult child, a neighbor, or close friend. They show up every day with love. But lately, you've noticed the tired eyes, the long sighs, the moments when their patience wears thin. This is what we call caregiver burnout, and it's one of the most important signs that it may be time to consider assisted living. Why this sign is so often ignored. Caregivers don't complain, they just keep going. Even when they're juggling full time jobs, raising children of their own, managing your appointments, your meals, your safety, often at the cost of their own health. You may have heard them say, I'm fine, really. I just need a good night's sleep. It's no problem, I'll handle it. But underneath those words, there's exhaustion, sometimes resentment, and often a growing feeling of helplessness. No one wants to feel like a burden, but no one should feel like they're breaking while trying to hold someone else together. When caregiver burnout goes unaddressed, it affects everyone. Your caregiver's health may suffer, physically and emotionally. Your care may become inconsistent, rushed, or even unsafe. Relationships can become strained, full of unspoken frustration or guilt. Important needs, yours and theirs, may be quietly neglected. Eventually, the person who loves you most may begin to feel trapped, and that's when mistakes, injuries, or emotional distance begin to show. Choosing assisted living is not replacing your caregiver, it's supporting both of you. It allows your spouse or child to return to being your partner, not your nurse. Your daughter can visit and have tea, not change your bedding. Your husband can sit beside you in peace, not worry about lifting you from the tub. With trained staff handling the daily tasks, the love can return to its rightful place in conversation, in companionship, in presence. If the one caring for you is running on empty, if you've noticed their smile fading or their tone becoming sharper, if they're doing everything and it's still not enough, then maybe the best gift you can give them is this. Let's look at other ways to do this together. Sometimes caring means letting go of doing it all alone. Sign number 6, a quiet inner feeling. I can't do this alone anymore. Sometimes the clearest sign isn't something you can see. It isn't a fall or a forgotten appointment or a missed meal. It's a whisper inside, soft, persistent, often unspoken, even to those closest to you. I'm tired. This is getting harder. I don't feel safe. I don't feel sure. I can't do this alone anymore. This feeling doesn't come with alarms or warning lights. It comes in quiet moments, sitting on the edge of the bed in the morning, trying to reach for your socks, or lying awake at night, wondering if anyone would hear you if something went wrong. It's a feeling of fragility, not just of the body, but of the spirit. As we age, we become experts at pushing through. We say, I'm fine, even when we're not. We tell ourselves just one more day, even when we're exhausted, because asking for help can feel like weakness. Because admitting the truth that we need more support takes more courage than people realize. But here's something important. Acknowledging this quiet inner voice is not giving up. It's listening, it's honoring your limits, and it's choosing to care for yourself just as deeply as you've cared for others. That inner voice is your intuition, your wisdom, telling you it's time to explore new options. Not because you failed, but because you deserve to feel safe. You deserve peace of mind. You deserve to move through your days without fear, strain, or isolation. Assisted living isn't a loss of freedom. It's a shift from doing everything alone to having gentle help by your side when you need it. If deep down you felt it, that ache, that question, that whisper, maybe I need more than this, then know this: you're not alone, and you're not wrong for feeling this way. You're simply listening to your body, to your heart, to your wisdom, and maybe, just maybe, it's time to let yourself be supported. Sign number 7, multiple medical issues that are hard to manage alone. Managing one health condition can be tiring. Managing 2, 3, or more, that can quietly become overwhelming, especially when you're trying to do it all on your own. If you're juggling multiple medications, frequent doctor visits, and chronic symptoms that seem to take turns flaring up, it may be time to ask, am I truly able to care for my health safely day after day? As we age, it's common to have more than one condition to manage, like high blood pressure, diabetes, arthritis, heart disease, memory decline, vision or hearing loss. Each condition comes with its own set of instructions, precautions, and medications. Sometimes they interact with each other. Sometimes the treatments for one make the other worse. And even when you try your best, it's exhausting. You may start to miss doses or take medication incorrectly, skip follow up appointments out of fatigue or confusion, struggle with monitoring blood sugar or blood pressure, feel anxious about managing it all without help. This isn't forgetfulness or weakness. It's simply too much for one person to handle alone, especially when your body is already tired. When independence turns into risk. Many seniors want to stay independent, and that's admirable. But when medical needs become too complex, trying to manage everything yourself can actually put your health at greater risk. Even one missed medication, one untreated infection, one misstep can spiral into hospitalization or worse. At some point, staying home alone with multiple medical conditions isn't independence. It's silent, dangerous pressure. Many assisted living communities have on site nurses or medical staff who can help manage and administer medication on time, monitor your vital signs, support chronic condition care, coordinate transportation to appointments, communicate with your doctors and family, all while allowing you to still live with dignity, freedom, and choice. You're not in a hospital. You're simply in a place where your health is watched over gently, consistently, and respectfully. If your health routines have become confusing, if the number of pills overwhelms you, if doctor instructions feel like another language, then maybe what your body is asking for isn't more willpower, it's more support. Choosing that support is not surrender. It's self care, it's self respect, it's wisdom. Part 2. Common myths about nursing homes that may be holding you back. Deciding to move into a nursing home or assisted living facility is deeply personal and often deeply emotional. But many people delay that decision not because they're not ready, but because of fear, shame, or outdated beliefs. Let's take a moment to gently explore some of the most common myths about nursing homes and what the truth actually looks like today. Myth number 1: going to a nursing home means I've failed. This is one of the most painful and most common beliefs among older adults. Many people feel that accepting help or moving into a nursing home means they've somehow given up or become a burden, that needing care is a sign of weakness, that staying at home, no matter how hard it gets, is proof of strength. But here's the truth: recognizing your needs is not failure, it's wisdom. Just as we once supported others in their time of need, there comes a moment when we must allow ourselves to receive care, not out of defeat, but out of self respect. Choosing a safer environment doesn't mean you're less capable. It means you've lived long enough to know that life changes and that letting go of struggle is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. Accepting help isn't the end of independence. It's a new beginning where you're no longer fighting alone. Myth number 2: only people who are completely dependent go to nursing homes. This is a common misunderstanding and one that often prevents people from getting the support they truly need. Many believe that assisted living is only for those who can no longer do anything for themselves. But the truth is, most residents in modern nursing homes are still quite independent. They dress themselves, they take part in group activities, they laugh, read, pray, create, just as they always have. The difference is, they now receive a little help where needed, assistance with medications, a safe environment for mobility, support with meals or bathing, friendly check ins throughout the day. Far from taking away freedom, assisted living helps preserve it longer by preventing accidents, reducing stress, and allowing energy to be used for what truly matters: living. It's not about losing control. It's about choosing a life with more safety, ease, and dignity. Myth number 3: I'll lose my freedom and privacy. One of the biggest fears about moving into a nursing home is the idea that you'll lose control of your own life, your choices, your routines, your personal space. But today's assisted living communities are not institutions, they are homes, and they are built with dignity and independence in mind. You can still Choose when to wake up and when to rest. Decorate your room the way you like. Enjoy quiet time when you want it. Say no, thank you to services you don't need that day. You're not being watched or restricted. You're being supported. Gently, respectfully, and only when you ask. True freedom isn't about doing everything alone. It's about feeling safe enough to live fully, knowing help is close by, but never forced. Assisted living doesn't take away your voice. It simply gives you a safer, more supportive place to use it. Myth number 4, my family must not love me if they're considering this. This is one of the most painful beliefs a senior can carry, but the truth is often the opposite. When your loved ones suggest assisted living, it's usually because they care deeply, not because they want to let go, but because they want to protect you. They've seen the falls, the fatigue, the forgotten meals. They lie awake at night wondering if you're safe. They want to help, but they're overwhelmed and afraid they're not enough on their own. Choosing a nursing home isn't a sign of abandonment. It's a sign of love meeting reality, a family doing their best, even when the decisions are hard. Let go of the guilt. Receiving help is not rejection. It's a new way of being held by people who love you enough to want the very best for you. Part 3, how to choose the right and compassionate nursing home. Once you've made peace with the idea that assisted living may be the next step, a new question arises. Where should I go? And how do I know it's the right place for me? Choosing a nursing home isn't just about checking off boxes or picking the nearest facility. It's about finding a place that feels like home, where safety, respect, and humanity go hand in hand. Here are gentle but important things to consider as you make this decision. 1, know what you truly need. Start by asking, do I need help with daily tasks like bathing or dressing? Am I managing multiple medications or medical conditions? Do I feel lonely and want more social connection? Do I need memory support or dementia care? Being honest about your needs isn't weakness. It's the first step toward living better. 2, visit in person. More than once, brochures and websites can't show you everything. Take a tour, walk the hallways, eat a meal, sit and observe how staff and residents interact. Ask yourself, do people look relaxed and cared for? Are staff warm or rushed and distant? Does it feel sterile or like a place where life is happening? A second or third visit, especially unannounced, can reveal even more. 3, ask about staff and support. Don't be afraid to ask hard questions. How many caregivers are on staff at night? Is there a nurse on site 24/7? How is medication managed? Are emergency protocols clear? Compassion is not just a feeling, it's built into systems, training, and culture. 4, look for joy, not just cleanliness. Yes, the place should be tidy and well kept, but more importantly, are there smiles, laughter, activities that bring meaning? A truly good nursing home doesn't just keep you alive, it helps you feel alive. 5, involve your heart, not just your head. Beyond the facts and figures, ask yourself, could I see myself here? Would I feel safe, respected, still me? Sometimes the heart knows before the mind does. Trust that. You're not looking for a bed. You're looking for a home, a place that holds your story with dignity, a space where you can rest and still rise with purpose. Take your time, ask questions, walk the halls, and when you find the right place, you'll feel it. In your body, that's in your breath, in your peace. Part 4, choosing a nursing home without losing your dignity or joy. There's a quiet fear that many seniors carry. If I move into a nursing home, will I still be me? Will I lose my independence? Will people see me as weak or worse, forgettable? These thoughts are natural, but here's a gentle truth. Your dignity doesn't live in your address. It lives in how you are treated, how you are seen, and how you see yourself. Moving into assisted living or a nursing home is not the end of your identity. It's simply a new chapter, one that can bring more ease, more community, and yes, even more joy. You still have your voice. You still have your preferences, your humor, your stories. You bring your essence with you into every room, every interaction, every sunrise. What many people don't realize is that in the right environment, seniors often begin to blossom again. They join gentle yoga or gardening groups. They share meals with new friends. They paint, write, sing, even fall in love again. Freed from the stress of daily logistics, cooking, cleaning, medications, safety, you now have the energy to enjoy the things that bring you meaning. In some ways, you return to who you've always been, but with lighter shoulders. Letting go of the house, the chores, the worry is not giving up. It's making space for connection, for peace, and for a slower, softer kind of living. And it's not just about you. When you move into a place that supports you well, your children worry less. Your spouse can be your partner again, not your caregiver. Your relationships shift from managing to enjoying. That too is dignity. If your heart is still unsure, that's okay. This isn't a decision to be rushed, but know this: you are not less because you ask for help. You are not weaker because you need support. And you are not alone, not in this choice and not in this chapter. Assisted living doesn't erase who you are. It protects who you are so that your days ahead can be lived not in survival, but in quiet strength, safety, and grace. Growing older brings changes, some gentle, some difficult, and one of the hardest changes is realizing that we may need more help than we used to. But asking for support is not weakness, it is strength, it is wisdom. It is honoring your body, your safety, and your right to live with dignity, not just exist with worry. Moving to a nursing home doesn't mean you're giving up. It means you're choosing peace over pressure, connection over isolation, and safety over silence. It's not the end of your independence. It's the beginning of a chapter where you're finally supported enough to simply be you. Let's talk together. Have you ever considered assisted living for yourself or for someone you love? What fears came up? What gave you peace? Share your story in the comments. You never know who might find courage from your words. If this video helped you, like this video to help more seniors find it. Subscribe to True Senior Wisdom for weekly healing, guidance, and gentle truth. And turn on the bell so you never miss a message of support and care. At True Senior Wisdom, we walk with you, one question at a time, one choice at a time, one gentle, powerful step at a time. You are not alone. You are never too far gone, and you are still and always worthy of a life filled with dignity and grace.